but of giant extraterrestrial beings.
It is a fact that when most of these gigantic sarcophagi were opened, nothing was inside them. But
these things may well have been created by extraterrestrials. Later, the Egyptians took them over, used them as sarcophagi, perhaps for these bulls.
I mean, I find it wild that this place was even discovered. And there's probably much more to be discovered here in Saqqara, and we never know what we're going to find. Absolutely.
Could it be that the Serapeum of Saqqara was originally built as a repository for extraterrestrial remains? But if so, what happened to them? How could they have simply vanished without a trace? Ancient astronaut theorists believe one possible answer can be found by closely examining another of ancient Egypt's most compelling artifacts: mummies. In the shadow of Egypt's majestic pyramids and monuments, and beneath its ever-shifting sands, lie the tombs and resting places of more than 1 million human mummies. The bodies, often thousands of years old, are so well preserved that most are still covered in flesh.
Mummification in ancient Egypt could be extremely expensive and was a very slow process. Families in Egypt would spend their entire fortune mummifying the dead. But why were the Egyptians mummifying people and going through these elaborate mummification rituals? It would seem to be that they did want to preserve the body as best they could.
The ancient Egyptians went to great lengths to keep the bodies of their dead from decomposing. All organs, except for the heart, were extracted. The brain was pulled out through the nose. All moisture was removed from the body, and hundreds of yards of linen were used to wrap the deceased, all in preparation for what the Egyptians believed to be the afterlife.
Giorgio, this is it. The Royal Mummy's Room.
Here, in the Royal Mummy's Room at the Cairo Museum, ancient astronaut theorist Giorgio Tsoukalos and Egyptologist Rami Rahmani have come to examine some peculiarities concerning mummification that have been largely hidden from the public.
So tell me about mummification. Why did the ancient Egyptians mummify their dead? Mummification was extremely important for ancient Egyptians because the concept of their religion, they believed that if they can perfectly preserve their body as is, then they can live for eternity in a different dimension, in the underworld, in the world of the dead. It's very interesting. The mummies that we see here, I mean, it is extraordinary, the level of preservation. Absolutely. Look at that, and you can see every bit. You can see his teeth is still in there. The queen there, you can see her hair is still there. Every toe, the toenails are still there. And I have to tell you, big parts of it still is a mystery to us.
What were the ingredients needed in order to mummify a body?
The first and most important ingredient in the process of mummification is the natron salt. The mummy would have to stay in the natron salt for a couple of weeks before it can go through the rest of the process. It's the driest salt there is. Because the main reason they want that salt is to take the liquid out as fast as possible from the mummy before the mummy starts rotting, to keep every part of it safe with all the liquids out.
The one thing that's always fascinated me is the idea that they were mummified in order to live on in the afterlife. And the afterlife, with all the religious symbology that exists in ancient Egypt, always has something to do with the stars. Now, if you look at the future, one way the
reaching another planet would be if we put ourselves into a state of suspended animation. And we would do this by being inside pods, sleeping like this. And so my question is whether or not the ancient Egyptians witnessed something like this and didn't understand that it was someone going back to their planet, putting on a suit, getting inside their sarcophagus, which looks like a pod, but a pod looks like a sarcophagus. So it's not symbolic at all, but in fact they witnessed something and misinterpreted it as a spiritual event. The origin of it may have been rooted in misunderstood technology.
But I think there is a point to be made here. You are assuming that they believed that this was symbolic, but for them it wasn't symbolic.
So this raises an interesting point that only mummies of the New Kingdom so far have been found, and no one in the Old Kingdom. So where have they gone?
Until recently, it was believed that mummification began in Egypt somewhere around 2600 BC. But in 2014, evidence was discovered that suggested the practice could have begun thousands of years earlier, long before the time of the pharaohs. But were the bodies of the dead being preserved for a future in the afterlife, or for some other, even
A very practical method of harvesting the energy of Earth to charge the body of mummy and transforming the whole thing into a very high power capacity.
a power capacity, transforming the bodies of dead pharaohs into sources of energy? Could such an audacious theory be scientifically possible?
Why did they use natron salt that comes from dry bed lake instead of marine salt from the Mediterranean Sea or the Red Sea? Natron salt is very alkaline. The body will become alkaline. And they're covering it with linen, with natural resins. Now that the resin is acidic. In contact with the alkaline body, you will have some sort of an ion exchange.
When we look at the mummification process in the tombs of the pharaoh, we find granite tombs. The ancient Egyptians referred to granite as a fire stone. They called it that because it's loaded with pure quartz crystal, and crystal holds vibration. When we combine this with the massive amounts of gold and other precious jewels that were used in the mummification process and placed upon the body, you begin to wonder, were they trying to trigger some kind of an electrical process that somehow transmuted the body?
Maybe we are dealing with some other sort of technology here, or an ancient civilization on Earth. They were making the body to vibrate, creating some sort of energy, a soul booster, of the deceased.
The reason why the ancient Egyptians mummified their pharaohs is that they were going to self-create a new light body, a new vehicle for the pharaoh's consciousness to survive. So effectively, they could continue on their journey into the stars. Our cutting-edge artificial intelligence and sci-fi-like desire to upload our consciousness into is an absolute and pure reflection of the ancient Egyptian mummification concept. This idea that we can create a new vehicle for ourselves, a non-biological entity that will enable us to live as immortal beings.
Could it be that with the process of mummification, the ancient Egyptians were trying to recreate the process that had been used in Egypt thousands of years earlier? At a time when the land was inhabited by an advanced extraterrestrial civilization. Ancient astronaut theorists say yes, and suggest that a direct similarity exists between the performed on the Egyptian pharaohs, and the original purpose of the stone sarcophagi in the Serapeum, the conversion of physical beings into pure energy. They also believe further evidence of extraterrestrial activity in ancient Egypt